On the evening of June 21st, 2025, somewhere beneath the waters of the Arabian Sea, a crew of American sailors prepared to do something their submarine had been designed for decades earlier, but had never done quite like this. Within minutes, over 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles erupted from vertical launch tubes aboard a single Ohio-class guided missile submarine streaking toward the Islamic Republic of Iran. By the time the missiles reached the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center, B-2 stealth bombers were already entering Iranian airspace from the west, but the submarine had fired first, and Iran never saw it coming. How did a vessel originally built to end civilization in a nuclear exchange become the opening act of the most significant American military strike in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq in 2003? To understand that, we need to go back to the Cold War, to a shipyard in Connecticut, and to a fear so profound it reshaped the ocean floor. The story of the Ohio class begins in the early 1970s when American defense planners faced a terrifying problem. Soviet shipyards were building submarines faster than the United States could track them. The existing American ballistic missile submarines, the Lafayette and Benjamin Franklin classes, were aging, loud by modern standards, and increasingly vulnerable to Soviet anti-submarine warfare. If the Soviets could locate and destroy those boats before a nuclear exchange, the foundational concept of mutual assured destruction would collapse. The Pentagon needed something new, something bigger, quieter, and capable of carrying more firepower than any submarine before it. The answer was a vessel so large it would rival a World War II light cruiser in length, yet so silent it could vanish into the deep ocean and stay there for months at a time. But building it took 3 presidencies and the better part of a decade. Construction began at the Electric Boat Division of General Dynamics in Groton, Connecticut in April 1976. The lead boat, USS Ohio, had its keel laid during Gerald Ford's presidency, was launched under Jimmy Carter, and was commissioned on November 11, 1981, under Ronald Reagan. At the commissioning ceremony, Vice President George H.W. Bush told the assembled crowd that the Ohio had introduced a new dimension in our nation's strategic deterrence. He was not exaggerating. The scale of the Ohio-class submarine dwarfed anything the United States Navy had built before. The Ohio-class submarine stretches 560 feet from bow to stern. Submerged, it displaces over 18,750 tons of water. A single S-8G pressurized water nuclear reactor drives the boat at speeds exceeding 20 knots underwater, and the reactor core is designed to last roughly 15 years between major overhauls. The crew never needs to surface for fuel. Their endurance is limited only by the food they carry and the patience of the sailors who eat it. Patrols can last 90 days or longer. Think about that for a second. A vessel longer than most office buildings, carrying enough nuclear weapons to reshape the map of the world, cruising silently beneath the ocean for 3 months at a time, with no one on the surface knowing where it was. But the true significance of the Ohio class was never about size or speed. It was about silence. During sea trials in 1982, the USS Ohio proved virtually undetectable. The boat was reportedly as quiet at cruising speed as the older Lafayette-class submarines were while barely moving. For a vessel carrying 24 Trident ballistic missiles, each armed with multiple nuclear warheads capable of striking targets thousands of miles away, that level of stealth meant one thing: the Soviet Union could never be sure where an Ohio-class submarine was, and if they could not find it, they could not destroy it before it launched. That uncertainty was the whole point. 18 Ohio-class boats were built between 1976 and 1997, forming the backbone of the sea-based leg of America's nuclear triad. Each boat operated with 2 rotating crews, designated blue and gold, allowing the submarines to spend roughly 2/3 of their time at sea on deterrence patrols. During the final years of the Cold War, 8 of these submarines operated in the Pacific, their locations one of the most closely guarded secrets in the United States military. Inside the hull, the Ohio class was divided into 4 watertight compartments stacked across multiple levels. The uppermost level beneath the sail housed the command and control center, the navigation room, and the sonar suite. Below that sat the missile control center and ship offices. The 3rd level held the crew's dining facilities and sleeping quarters, with 2 small libraries and individual music headphones at each bunk, a small concession to the mental strain of spending 3 months sealed inside a steel tube. Below that, the fourth level contained the torpedo room and auxiliary machinery. The crew's daily existence was defined by routine and silence. Submarine crews operate on an 18-hour cycle rather than the usual 24, dividing each day into 6-hour watches. There are no windows, there is no weather. The only indication that time is passing comes from the clock and the meal schedule. Submariners describe the experience as monotonous in the best possible way, because excitement on a nuclear submarine usually means something has gone terribly wrong, but the Ohio class was not defenseless if trouble found it. Each Ohio class boat also carried 4 Mark 68 torpedo tubes in the bow, loaded with Mark 48 ADCAP torpedoes, heavy weapons capable of speeds exceeding 50 knots and designed to destroy both surface ships and enemy submarines, while the torpedoes were a secondary system. On a boat built for strategic missile launches, they gave the Ohio class a defensive capability that made it dangerous to approach, even without its main armament. To put the destructive potential in perspective, a single Ohio class submarine loaded with Trident missiles carried more nuclear firepower than was used in every war in human history combined. The goal was never to use that firepower. The goal was to make the cost of a nuclear first strike so catastrophic that no rational adversary would ever attempt one. And for decades, that calculation held. The Cold War ended without a nuclear exchange, and historians continue to credit the Ohio class and its predecessors as one of the reasons why. But the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 created a new question. 14 Ohio-class submarines still carried nuclear warheads on patrol across the Atlantic and Pacific. 4 more sat at their berths in Kings Bay, Georgia, and Bangor, Washington, without a clear mission. The enemy they were built to deter no longer existed. The answer came in 1994 when the Nuclear Posture Review determined that the United States only needed 14 ballistic missile submarines to maintain strategic deterrence. That left 4 boats without a nuclear mission. Scrapping them was an option, but these were vessels that had cost billions of dollars and still had decades of reactor life remaining. The Department of Defense chose a different path between 2002 and 2008. The 4 oldest Ohio-class boats underwent a military conversion that fundamentally altered their purpose. The USS Ohio, USS Michigan, USS Florida, and USS Georgia had their 24 Trident ballistic missile tubes removed and replaced with 22 vertical launch system tubes, each capable of holding 7 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles. That gave each converted submarine a maximum payload of 154 Tomahawks, roughly equal to the cruise missile capacity of an entire surface battle group. 2 of the original missile tubes were further modified into lockout chambers for Navy SEAL teams and unmanned underwater vehicles. The boats also received upgraded communication suites, including a common submarine radio room and 2 high data rate antennas, transforming each vessel into a forward deployed command center capable of supporting up to 66 special operations personnel for 90 days. These 4 submarines were redesignated as SSGN, guided missile submarines, and they represented something genuinely new in naval warfare. A platform that could approach an enemy coastline undetected, launch a massive conventional strike, and disappear before anyone knew where the missiles had come from. But what made these converted SSGN vessels truly dangerous was the Tomahawk cruise missile loaded inside their vertical launch tubes. The weapon that made this possible was the BGM-109 Tomahawk land attack cruise missile, a precision weapon that had been in service since the 1980s but had evolved dramatically over the decades. Each Tomahawk measures over 18 feet in length, weighs roughly 3,500 pounds at launch, and flies at subsonic speeds close to the surface of the Earth, following terrain contours to avoid radar detection. It navigates using a combination of inertial guidance, GPS satellite positioning, and terrain-matching radar, allowing it to strike a target more than 930 miles away with accuracy measured in single-digit feet. What makes the Tomahawk particularly dangerous from a submarine platform is the element of total surprise. A surface warship launching cruise missiles can be tracked by satellite and radar. An aircraft carrier launching fighters generates an enormous electromagnetic signature, but a submarine sitting beneath the ocean surface launching missiles through vertical tubes that break the water for only seconds gives an adversary almost no warning. By the time the missiles appear on radar, they are already in flight, already low, and already very difficult to intercept. Together, the 4 Ohio-class guided missile submarines represented more than half of the submarine force's total vertical launch payload capacity. A single boat could match the cruise missile output of a full-surface battle group, and unlike a battle group, it could get within striking distance of a hostile coastline without anyone knowing it was there. The USS Georgia was the third of the 4 boats to undergo this transformation. Originally commissioned as a ballistic missile submarine on February 11, 1984, at the Naval Submarine Base in Kings Bay, Georgia, she spent 2 decades carrying nuclear warheads on deterrence patrols across the Atlantic and the Pacific. Her conversion to a guided missile submarine designated SSGN began in October 2005 and was completed in 2008. When she emerged from the shipyard, she carried Tomahawk missiles instead of Trident warheads, and her mission had fundamentally changed from preventing war to fighting one. Over the following years, Georgia deployed repeatedly to the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, conducting exercises with NATO allies and special operations forces. She made port calls at Naples, Suda Bay, in Crete and Diego Garcia, supporting stability operations and contingency planning across multiple theaters. But it was a deployment in the summer of 2024 that would place her at the center of a geopolitical crisis unlike anything she had faced before. In August 2024, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin ordered the USS Georgia to move from the Mediterranean Sea into the waters of the Middle East. The order came in response to escalating threats from Iran and its proxies, particularly Hezbollah, following Israel's assassination of Hezbollah's top commander Fuad Shukr in Beirut and Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran the previous month. The Middle East was on the edge of a wider war, and the United States was sending a message. What made this deployment unusual was that the Pentagon announced it publicly. Normally, the movements of nuclear-powered submarines are among the most closely held secrets in the American military. You do not telegraph where your submarines are. That defeats the very purpose of having them. But in this case, the announcement was the point. Washington wanted Tehran to know that a vessel carrying over 150 Tomahawk cruise missiles was now within striking distance of Iranian territory. The Georgia transited through the Suez Canal from the Mediterranean into the Red Sea, pushing deeper into the Central Command area of responsibility. She joined 2 carrier strike groups already positioned in the region, creating a layered deterrent that combined surface, air, and undersea capabilities. For the next several months, the Georgia remained on station, waiting. The crisis she had been sent to deter did not unfold the way anyone expected. Instead of a single retaliatory exchange, the region spiraled towards something far larger. The roots of the escalation stretched back to October 2023, when Hamas launched its attack on Israel from Gaza. The result was plunging the Middle East into its worst security crisis in decades. Iran, the primary patron of Hamas and Hezbollah, found itself drawn deeper into the conflict as Israel systematically dismantled the axis of resistance over the following year. What followed was a chain of escalation across the skies above Tehran, Beirut, and Tel Aviv that would eventually bring an American submarine into the fight. In April 2024, Israel struck the Iranian consulate in Damascus, killing senior Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders. Iran retaliated with Operation True Promise, its first ever direct missile and drone strike on Israeli territory, which was largely intercepted with American help. A cycle of tit-for-tat escalation followed. Israel assassinated Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh inside Tehran, then killed Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and IRGC commander Abbas Nilfaroshan in Lebanon. Iran responded with a second wave of missiles in October 2024, but Israeli air defenses again limited the damage. However, what happened next stripped Iran of its last defensive shield. Israel's retaliatory strikes in October destroyed nearly all of Iran's Russian-supplied S-300 air defense systems, stripping away a defensive layer that Tehran could not easily replace. Moscow, despite selling Iran the systems, offered no replacements and no military support by the spring of 2025. Diplomatic negotiations between the United States and Iran over Tehran's nuclear program had stalled. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported that Iran had stockpiled enough enriched uranium to produce 9 nuclear warheads. Iran's stockpile included material enriched to 60% purity, far beyond what any civilian energy program requires. A 60-day negotiating window set by President Trump expired in early June, with no deal reached. The negotiating window had closed. And what came next would send B-2 bombers from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri and Tomahawk missiles from beneath the Arabian Sea, streaking toward Iranian soil for the first time in over 3 decades. On June 12, 2025, the Board of Governors of the International Atomic Energy Agency passed a resolution declaring Iran non-compliant with its nuclear obligations for the first time in 2 decades. The next day, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a massive preemptive strike involving over 200 fighter jets, hitting more than 100 targets across Iran, including nuclear facilities, military bases, and infrastructure installations. Israeli Mossad operatives and commando forces simultaneously sabotaged air defense systems and missile sites on the ground. Iran retaliated with hundreds of ballistic missiles aimed at Israeli cities. Over the following 9 days, the two countries traded strikes while the world watched. Casualties mounted on both sides. But on the evening of June 21st, 2025, the United States entered the fight. The operation was called Midnight Hammer, and it had been planned for years. According to Pentagon officials, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency began studying vulnerabilities in Iran's underground nuclear infrastructure as far back as 2009, searching for ways to penetrate facilities deliberately built inside mountains and buried under hundreds of feet of rock and concrete. The specific strike plan was one of the most complex aerial missions in American military history. 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers departed from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, flying east across the Atlantic and the Mediterranean for 18 hours with multiple mid-air refueling stops while maintaining near total radio silence. A separate group of B-2s flew west toward the Pacific as a deliberate decoy, generating news reports that bombers were heading toward Guam and drawing attention away from the real strike package approaching from the opposite direction. The timing was precise down to the minute. The B-2s crossed the Atlantic, refueled over the Mediterranean, and linked up with escort aircraft over friendly airspace in a maneuver that General Kane described as requiring exact synchronization across multiple platforms in a narrow piece of airspace. Fighter jets from the Navy and Air Force, including F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning fighters, formed the leading edge of the formation, ready to engage any Iranian aircraft or surface-to-air missile batteries that detected the approaching strike package. But before the bombers reached Iranian airspace, the submarine acted first. At approximately 5 in the evening Eastern Standard Time on June 21st, the Ohio-class SSGN launched more than 24 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles from its position somewhere within the Central Command area of responsibility. The missiles streaked toward Isfahan, where they struck surface infrastructure at the Nuclear Technology Center. Each Tomahawk weighed 3,500 pounds, measured over 18 feet in length, and could reach targets more than 930 miles away. The missiles could be redirected in flight, changing course instantaneously if ordered to do so. They were designed to penetrate air defenses and strike with extreme precision, and they had already proven their effectiveness during Operation Rough Rider against Houthi rebels, where they were launched continuously from the aircraft carrier Harry Truman over 50 days of combat. The Tomahawks served a dual purpose during Midnight Hammer. They destroyed surface targets at Isfahan while simultaneously forcing Iranian radar operators and air defense crews to focus their attention on the incoming cruise missiles from the south and east. Meanwhile, the real hammer was approaching from the west. If you have been learning something from this breakdown so far, consider hitting subscribe. We cover military history and technology like this every week, and the next video in this series is one you will not want to miss. As the strike package entered Iranian airspace, the United States employed deception tactics, including decoys, while 4th and 5th generation fighter aircraft pushed ahead of the bomber formation at high altitude and high speed, sweeping for enemy fighters and surface-to-air missile threats. According to General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, not a single shot was fired at the American strike package on the way in. Iran's fighters never flew. Its surface-to-air missile systems apparently never detected the approaching aircraft. At approximately 6:40 in the evening Eastern Time, the lead B-2 dropped 2 GBU, 57 massive ordnance penetrators on the Fordow enrichment facility, a hardened underground complex buried deep inside a mountain. Each bomb weighed 30,000 pounds and carried the explosive equivalent of 11 tons of TNT, designed to tunnel through more than 100 feet of concrete before detonating. It was the first time the weapon had ever been used in combat. 7 B-2 bombers ultimately delivered 14 of these massive bombs across the Fordow and Natanz facilities. Combined with the Tomahawk strikes on Isfahan, the operation involved over 125 aircraft, approximately 75 precision-guided weapons, and lasted roughly 25 minutes from first impact to last. But had the Tomahawk strikes on Isfahan and the bunker busters at Fordow actually worked? President Trump declared that Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities had been completely and totally obliterated. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called the operation an incredible and overwhelming success. General Kane was more measured, stating that the strikes were designed to severely degrade Iran's nuclear weapons capability, while declining to confirm what nuclear capability remained at the sites. The reality, as it often does in war, turned out to be more complicated than the initial announcements suggested. Israeli military officials told reporters that the Fordow facility was substantially damaged but not destroyed outright. The Pentagon's own spokesperson later assessed that the strikes had set Iran's nuclear program back by 1 to 2 years. A Defense Intelligence Agency assessment issued with low confidence suggested the setback might only be measured in months. Satellite imagery taken in the days before the strike showed trucks loading materials outside the Fordow entrance, raising the possibility that Iran had moved enriched uranium from the facility before it was hit. The supply of enriched uranium at Isfahan was also believed to have survived the Tomahawk strikes, though it may have been buried under debris. So did the submarine's Tomahawk barrage at Isfahan actually accomplish what it was designed to do? None of this diminishes what the submarine and the bomber crews accomplished that night. The SSGN delivered a decisive opening salvo that helped blind and distract Iranian defenses during the most critical phase of the operation. Its stealth allowed it to position within striking range without detection. Its firepower allowed it to saturate a target area with precision munitions. And its presence in the region for months beforehand had served as both a deterrent and a constant reminder to Tehran that the United States maintained the ability to strike from directions Iran could not predict. The 12-day war ended on June 24, 2025, with a ceasefire brokered through Omani mediation. Iran's retaliatory strike against Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar on June 23 was described by President Trump as weak, with no American casualties reported. The conflict had killed hundreds on both sides, damaged critical infrastructure across Iran and Israel, and left the question of Iran's nuclear future unresolved. But even among those who praised the bombing campaign, doubts lingered about what the strikes at Fordow and Isfahan had actually destroyed. Former Supreme Allied Commander Europe Wesley Clark called the strikes a brilliant operation, flawless in execution, but cautioned that the assessment of severe damage to the program did not mean Iran's nuclear ambitions were finished. He described the situation as a wounded tiger, a regime hurt badly enough to be dangerous, but not eliminated entirely. Retired General David Petraeus echoed similar concerns, noting that the larger question was whether enriched uranium or centrifuges had been stored at locations the strikes never reached. The Iranian parliament voted to close the Strait of Hormuz in response, though the measure required ratification by the Supreme National Security Council and was never fully implemented. International shipping continued through the strait under heightened alert. Russia and China condemned the American strikes but offered Tehran no military support, exposing the limits of Iran's Look East strategy. The alliances Iran had cultivated were transactional, not strategic, and when the bombs fell, Tehran faced the most capable military on Earth essentially alone. And if you think that was the end of the story for the Ohio class, the debate inside the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill was only beginning. Iran would later describe the 12-day war as the imposed war, borrowing the same term the country had used for its devastating 8-year conflict with Iraq in the 1980s. The comparison was intentional. Both wars left deep scars on the national psyche, both exposed military vulnerabilities that the regime preferred to keep hidden, and both reshaped how Iran thought about its own security for years afterward. For the Ohio-class submarine, Operation Midnight Hammer served as something unexpected, a valediction. The Navy Secretary confirmed to lawmakers that the Ohio-class guided missile submarine had performed exceptionally, causing significant damage to Iran's nuclear capacity. But the same boats that had just proven their worth in combat were nearing the end of their operational lives. The first of the 14 remaining Ohio-class submarines will reach the end of its life cycle by 2027, and the intended replacement, the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine, is running approximately 2 years behind schedule, with delivery now forecast for March 2029. That gap between retirement and replacement represents a strategic risk. The defense officials have acknowledged openly. Admiral James Kilby, acting Chief of Naval Operations, testified before Congress that the Columbia-class delays remain a pressing national priority. The Ohio boats cannot serve forever, their reactor cores have finite lives, and the maintenance required to extend those lives grows more expensive and less certain. With each passing year, the Navy has explored extending the service lives of select Ohio-class boats that retain sufficient nuclear fuel and are in good enough material condition, but these are stopgap measures. The fleet needs new hulls. So what happens to the Navy's strike capability when these Cold War submarines leave the fleet for the scrapyard? The Columbia-class is already under construction at the Electric Boat Shipyard in Groton, Connecticut, designed to carry the next generation of nuclear deterrent with advanced stealth features and a new reactor. But the program has struggled with manufacturing delays at the same shipyards in Groton and Newport News, Virginia, that built the Ohio class decades ago. The industrial base that once produced military submarines at Cold War speed has contracted significantly, and rebuilding that capacity takes years, not months. Meanwhile, the 4 SSGN boats face a different kind of retirement pressure. The Ohio, Michigan, Florida, and Georgia are the oldest boats in the class, and they were never intended to serve this long. When they leave the fleet, the Navy will lose not just their cruise missile capacity, but also their unique ability to insert special operations forces from a stealthy undersea platform. No current replacement program addresses that specific mission set, creating a capability gap that extends beyond simple missile counts. And yet, if you want to understand what the Navy is about to lose when the Georgia and her sister ships leave Kings Bay for the last time, consider what this one submarine accomplished in her 41 years of service. What Operation Midnight Hammer demonstrated is that the Ohio-class platform, originally designed in the 1970s to survive a nuclear apocalypse, remains one of the most versatile and effective weapons in the American military arsenal. A submarine that was built to deter the Soviet Union proved capable of opening a precision strike campaign against a regional adversary 4 decades later, in a conflict that its designers could never have imagined. The USS Georgia was commissioned in the same year that the original Macintosh computer went on sale. She was carrying nuclear warheads when the Berlin Wall fell. She was retrofitted with cruise missiles during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in June 2025, she launched Tomahawks into the heart of Iran's nuclear program, while a formation of stealth bombers followed behind her. Whether the strikes on Isfahan, Fordow, and Natanz achieve their ultimate strategic objectives remains a question historians and policymakers in Washington will debate for years. What is less debatable is the role the Ohio-class submarine played that night. The Ohio-class entered service to prevent the unthinkable. 44 years later, it proved it could do something its Cold War architects never planned for. It could fight a real war from the shadows and win the opening minutes before the enemy even knew the battle had begun. The era of the Ohio-class submarine is drawing to a close. The Columbia-class is taking shape on the construction floor at Electric Boat in Groton, built to carry a new generation of nuclear deterrent beneath the waves. But for one night in June 2025, the old Cold War machine reminded the world what it was capable of. And somewhere beneath the surface of the Arabian Sea, the crew of that submarine turned for home, their mission complete, their vessel still undetected, still silent, still invisible, the same way it was designed to be half a century ago for a war that never came. Stay tuned for the next video. We will go deeper into the B-2 Spirit bombers, which flew 18 hours non-stop to deliver the most devastating conventional bombs ever used in combat.